Susan Weiner was appointed Executive Director of Georgia Council of the Arts in 2004. Under her direction, the agency was granted funding to all 159 counties in the state. She has been an entrepreneur and owned her own management company, Weiner Associates. She has served as mayor of Savannah, Georgia, 1992 through 1995. And she has worked professionally on stage as an actress regionally, and internationally. Mr. Michael Kaiser has been president of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts since 2001. Dubbed the Turnaround King for his work at numerous institutions, including the Royal Opera House London, American Ballet Theatre, Avon Ailey American Dance Theatre, and the Kansas City Ballet. Michael has earned international renown for his expertise in arts management. With the help of the Kennedy senior staff and 200 volunteers, mentors, the Arts in Crisis Initiative currently provides free arts management consultation to over 475 art organizations across the United States. And this is something that Michael created after the crash, after the 2001 incident. So we're very grateful for Michael for being a heads up on this situation. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Susan Weiner and Michael Kaiser.
Well, oh, it's louder than I thought.
It's more people than I thought.
You know, we really wanted to give you southern weather. And we're really sorry that we couldn't accommodate that request. But hopefully you'll be pleased with the size of the audience.
That's great. And
more importantly, with their interest in what it is that you have to say.
Thank you.
I want to ask one question of the audience first. By a show of hands, I would like to know how many board members of nonprofit arts organizations are in the room. God bless you.
Thank you.
And for everyone else to know, the cars are still lined around the building, so more are still coming. For those of you who haven't read the book, this one.
It's a good picture of me, don't you
think?
Yeah,
it's a great picture. There are 10 rules in the beginning. And so for your benefit, and also to give Michael a chance to really explain himself and what he's learned, I'm asking 10 questions. And each one deals with one of the 10 rules. So here we go. Rule number 1 says that someone, emphasis mine, must lead. When an arts organization is in crisis, Michael, your first rule states that the most difficult part is getting all of the parties to agree that one person must be entrusted with the task and that all of the others, the board, the donors, and the staff need to let that person lead. I assume you didn't know that when you were hired to do your first turnaround at the Kansas City Ballet. So you couldn't ask for that power before you were hired.
It's true.
How did you cope?
Well, at the Kansas City Ballet, as in most organizations that are in trouble, they've been in trouble for a while. Very few arts organizations are in trouble for a week or a month. They're usually in trouble for months and months or years. In the case of the Kansas City Ballet, I entered an organization where I was the 5th chief executive in 5 years. And that's not always so unusual for really troubled organizations. And troubled organizations are characterized by, almost always by a lack of hope, a lack of excitement, the sense that you can't really get anything done. You're caught in this trap and it's never going to get better. And my job, particularly coming from the outside, is to instill hope but not sort of just empty hope. It's hope through a strategy, saying, okay, here is the approach I think we should take. And because this organization, I wouldn't have taken the job if I didn't think I had an approach that I thought would have worked. We had a tagline at the Kansas City Ballet when I got there. It was the company that can't make payroll. And every 2 weeks, we would call around town saying, do you have $500 or $300 or $800 that we can use to make payroll? And I knew that this was not the way to make a healthy, vibrant arts organization. We also, by the way, had an amazing artistic director, fantastic dancers, great ballet mistress, great head of the school, world-class people. But it was an organization that had built this reputation for being incompetent and for not knowing how to run itself. And it had been vastly under-marketed in its community. And so I knew that this was a much better organization artistically than the community appreciated. And so I came in with that point of view. And from my first interview even, before I even had the job, I said, this is what I will do here. And you know, when you inject a little bit of hope amongst people who are so depressed and feel there isn't an answer, they're pretty happy to give you authority pretty quickly. They're happy to see if it'll work. And I would say it didn't take very long in Kansas City to get people lined up, and we paid off the entire historic deficit in 9 months, which is a very rapid turnaround. Now, it wasn't a very large deficit, it was just $150,000. But it was an organization that had so much potential. And so what we did, and I started to explore this whole concept of what I call institutional marketing. I know we'll talk more about later, but I said, what can I do to get this community to realize this is an important organization? And we did several things. We put in our board the anchor of the Live at 5 News of the NBC affiliate, and his board contribution was 4 times a year. He put us in his television show. I found an early morning talk show called Good Morning Kansas City that no one wanted to be on because you had to get up at 3:30 in the morning. And I'm an early riser, so I didn't mind. And I did that 3 times a year. They gave me 20 minutes at a time, and I was talking to the business community as they got ready for work. I negotiated our debut tour to New York City. We were the first Kansas City organization ever to perform in New York City. That was a very important thing for Kansas City, and I started to sell us as the key cultural export of Kansas City. My artistic director rediscovered a work of George Balanchine, and we did that. It hadn't been done in over 20 years, and dance press came from around the country to cover that. We built a relationship with the Alvin Ailey organization and started to do several of the works by Alvin Ailey. And then I did one other thing, which is I had one of my board members give a cocktail party in his home. He had just redecorated, which is a big deal in Kansas City. And we invited 40 of the community leaders, business leaders, philanthropic leaders, political leaders to his home, had the cocktail party. In the middle, I gave a 15-minute presentation of our strategic plan. I gave everyone a copy of the plan, changed the way they viewed us almost overnight. And as I said, this all happened in 9 months. And in a 9-month period, we were the hot thing in town. And I didn't know going in I had to be the leader, but I realized I had to have a strategy because I'm a born planner. And I realized from doing this that if you're going to do a turnaround, and frankly, we're all in turnaround mode, even if we don't think we are in the arts. We're never that healthy. If the Getty Museum's laying off staff, we're all in trouble. And I realized that there has to be someone who has a vision and a plan. And the reason why I believe it has to be one person, and it's not that only one person has ideas, but why one person has to lead, is because in troubled organizations, almost always there are lots of different factions of people who think they have the right answer. And this person's pursuing this, and this person's pursuing this, and this person thinks that's the right answer. And the problem is you can't pursue 4 strategies at once. It doesn't work. And so I realized from that experience that if someone could come in with an approach, with hope, with an idea, with some specific things to do, not just let's market, but rather let's do these 5 different things, we could start to make change. And it set the Kansas City Ballet in a course. Next year, they're opening the big new Performing Arts Center in Kansas City, and it really all started in 1985 with this turnaround of the ballet.
Okay, so there must be one leader And your rules, second rule says that leader must have a plan. Now, I'm going to repeat what you said in the book. The plan must include the mission, the environment, an honest evaluation of strengths and weaknesses, a set of strategies, a detailed implementation plan, and of course, a financial plan. But then you follow that with 4 words in italics, bold type. I assume this is your mantra. Would you please explain good art, well marketed?
Surely. You know, the arts are a really unusual industry. And we rely upon so many people loving us. We rely upon the goodwill of so many people inside the organization and outside the organization. We need the support of our staff. We need the support of a volunteer board. We need the support of our other volunteers. We need the support of an audience and of a community and of a group of donors and of the press and of the government. It's just so many people who have to think well of us. And healthy arts organizations are those that are constantly welcoming people into their families. And unhealthy organizations are the ones who are holding on for dear life to the few people that love them. And what brings people into an arts organization? What makes people love an arts organization? Well, it's really exciting work, and it's letting people know about it. It's just as simple as that. And so for me, the good art well marketed is just that, doing work that gets people really excited about who you are, and then marketing that work to death. And what scares me about the environment of the arts right now is that I see so many arts organizations trying to play it safe. I read in the press, I hear board members saying, now is not the time to take a risk artistically, let's just do Phantom of the Opera every night. And the truth is, what brings people into our family is when they're surprised, when they're excited. And now is a time more than ever to be planning those big transformational projects that get people really excited. Even if you can't do them today, even if you don't have the resource today, plan them for 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. But you have to be doing the exciting art. And I'm telling you, it's my biggest sadness as I travel the country now, is how many arts organizations have had the creativity beaten out of them. And I really despair, because the only way we're going to build our constituencies, the only way we're going to get more audience members, the only way we're going to get more donors and more press coverage is by doing the projects that get people really excited, not the projects that are just what everyone else is doing. If we're all doing the same work, we're going to look like a very dull industry. And in this environment particularly, where we have to compete harder for resource, where there is less money for the arts, those arts organizations that are going to get resources are the ones who compete best. And competing best means competing with the best art. And so I really think, for me, that's just the crucial part of health of the arts. And that's such good news. I mean, it's such good news that health of the arts isn't about cutting your budget, that health of the arts isn't about being the most efficient, that health of the arts isn't about having the prettiest invitation for your gala. Health in the arts really comes from having the best art and then making sure that in an extremely aggressive way people know about it.
Which leads to your rule number 3, which is you cannot save your way to health.
Sure can't.
You say that obviously it's advisable under certain circumstances to cut some things from your budget.
Absolutely. But
where you cut it from your budget is key.
Absolutely.
And you say there's one place never to cut it.
Don't cut your art. A lot of board members hear me speak and they get very nervous thinking that I spend money I don't have. I don't do that. I've never had a deficit in my career. I've been doing it for 25 years. As my staff will tell you, I squeeze every nickel till the buffalo poops. I don't spend money happily, but I'm really clear on where to spend money and where not to spend money. And I truly believe in spending money on your programming. By the way, when I say good art, please forgive me, those of you who do a lot of arts education. I mean good programming. I'm talking about art and arts education. I'm not just talking about performance or visual art. I'm talking about the programming of the organization. That is where I put the money, and I cut everything else. I really do. I cut absolutely everything else. I've never seen a budget I can't cut. But I don't like to cut what we show to the public, what represents who we are, that which achieves our mission. That I just cannot cut, and I won't. And sometimes you have to. Sometimes, as a last resort, you have no choice, and I appreciate that. And there are some organizations, and I've consulted to several, who grew to a point where they couldn't support the size of the work they did because they had lasted on some extraordinary money. I'll give you an example. I've been consulting to the New York City Opera in New York. They had great difficulty about a year and a half ago because what happened was for years and years and years they balanced their budget based on bequests. Every year they were fortunate that someone died and left them a chunk of money. And then for 3 years in a row, unfortunately, no one died who left them any money, and they were in deep trouble. That was not a sustainable budget. That programming had to be cut. So I'm not saying you never cut programming. And sometimes you're on death's door and you just can't do as much this year. And I appreciate then you have to cut. But it has to be the last resort, not the first resort. And too many arts organizations make it the first resort. When I got to American Ballet Theater, they had done the same ballet for 7 years in a row in their New York season, Romeo and Juliet. They did it for 7 years in a row because it was rehearsed, they had the costumes, they had the sets, it was all ready to go, it was cheap. But think how bored the audiences and the donors had gotten, and they were surprised they had a big deficit. And when I got to the Royal Opera House, the poster child for sick arts organizations, when I got there, our deficit was $30 million. My board in its wisdom said the way we'll solve this $30 million deficit is not to do any performances for a year and a half. Well, obviously there's no earned income, and then there's obviously no contributed income. Who's going to give money to something that's doing nothing? Those are the absurd examples, but you know, when we start whittling at our programming and doing less interesting work and less interesting work and less interesting work, we're down that slippery slope. And what I would say is, if this year cannot be your best, most exciting, most wonderful year in the arts, plan great work for 2, 3, and 4 years from now, and talk about it. When I got to American Ballet Theater and we really were at death's door, we couldn't have made a huge season out of nothing. We had nothing. I announced our largest artistic project for 3 years out. It was a new full-length ballet based on Shakespeare's Othello with a new score, new costumes, new sets, new everything. I had 3 years to find the money for it, but in those 3 years, I got people excited because we didn't look like we were dying anymore. So you can't save your way to health. You're not going to get healthy by getting smaller and smaller and smaller. What you do is become less and less relevant. You're not going to get healthy by cutting art over and over and over again.
And your next rule emphasizes that. Rule 5 says extend your programming planning calendar, which you've already referenced.
Didn't we skip one?
Oh, you're right, I did. Oh, I guess he knows his rules. Rule 4.
Thank you.
Okay. Focus on today and tomorrow, not yesterday.
Yeah, this is so important. I didn't want to miss it.
Okay, sorry.
Organizations that are having challenges, financial challenges particularly, but they can be other kinds of challenges, they tend to spend so much time looking backwards. Whose fault is it? When did it start? You know, it was then he was executive director. No, it was when that person was artistic director. No, it was because of that board chair. How big is the problem? I think it's this big. No, it's this big. And you spend all this time just arguing over history and not solving the problem. It doesn't work. The way you fix an arts organization is say, okay, here's where we are. You can learn from your history, but let's not talk about it so much. Let's talk about where we are, and now let's figure out what we're going to do about it, and let's move forward. And organizations do it to themselves by spending too much time recounting history.
May I do a follow-up?
Please.
I'm imagining the executive directors who are here today listening to you and saying to themselves, oh, great advice, Michael, great. I got 3 guys out there who are knocking on my door because I haven't paid them in a year. I got a payroll I can't meet, and you want me to think about the future?
Absolutely. I mean, believe me, I've spent more time with creditors sitting on my desk than you can imagine in my turnaround careers. I'm not saying you aren't forced by certain people to talk about what you owe them. That's a different story. I'm talking about our own conversations in our board meetings and our staff meetings where we sit there and talk about whose fault it is. That doesn't get that creditor paid. And frankly, by the way, the best way to work with creditors in my experience, and I've dealt with a lot of them, is to get them excited about where you're moving the organization. Very few creditors have any investment in our going bankrupt because they're going to get precious little from us because we have so few assets to liquidate if we really do go away. They have only an incentive to see us succeed. And so I work very hard with my creditors to get them excited about the plan I'm putting in place rather than just, again, talking about when was the debt incurred.
Okay. Now Rule 5. Extend your programming planning calendar. Most of us have read the guru books, business guru books, plan 5 years out, and you're endorsing that. But you talk in that process about the difference between risky programming and risky operations, and how the planning process avoids the one and encourages the other.
Yeah. Number one, let me say that I see too many arts organizations doing their 3, 4, or 5 year plans, but leaving out the art part of it. They talk about how they're going to do the marketing and the fundraising and the board development, and we're going to have this staff thing, and we're going to do all this building thing, but they don't talk about what the art's going to be. I don't know how you plan for the future if you don't plan your art. How do you plan your marketing if you don't know what work you're doing? I just don't get that, number one. But number two, I think there's a tremendous, tremendous value in planning your art multiple years in advance. And it's something I recommend to all kinds of arts organizations, and one of the big and small. And one of the interesting things in this environment is so many arts organizations are saying, well, I don't know what the world will be like in 3 years. I can't plan for art. And my belief is what makes an arts organization successful are those large transformative projects, the projects that get people really turned on and excited. And you can't make those projects happen in 6 months or a year. I plan every one of my major projects 5 years in advance at the Kennedy Center. And I take 5 years to make it as good as it can be, to research, to think about it, number one, so it's better art. I can take bigger risks because I have time to create both donors and audience for that risk, and I'll give you an example in a moment. And I believe you also improve your fundraising dramatically. You know, many of us, we go to a potential donor and we're so nervous about funding our next project that we meet the donor, we just start talking about our next project, how great it is, what it's going to do, and how we need more money, and blah, 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 blah. This project may not interest that donor. And so we may not get a gift, or we might get a token gift. I don't think it's the best fundraising technique. I like to go to a donor and I like to listen to them. I like to listen to hear them talk about the things they like to fund. It is not that I make a project to match their interests. I don't do that. But I have in my mind 5 years worth of projects. And I can pull from that list the project or projects I think are most likely to interest them. And I can tell you, you get a higher hit rate that way, and you certainly get larger gifts that way. And you enter in any given year with a whole bunch of your fundraising already done. One example, last year my very large project at the Kennedy Center was a festival of Arab culture. I did this festival of Arab culture because I felt Americans knew very little about Arab people, and it was important for us to understand the history and wealth of culture from that region. It was not an accessible project. It is not art that my audience knew very well whatsoever. But I spent 5 years at it. First of all, 5 years to figure out which artists we wanted to have and how to put this big project together. Secondly, to do the contracting. Thirdly, just to get the visas. Imagine we brought 800 Arab performers to Washington in 2 weeks. It's not the simplest thing to do these days. But very importantly, it gave me 5 years also to raise the money for the festival, which we did a lot of times from donors who were not our normal donors, but from people from the region that it gave us time to meet them and learn them and build relationships. But also, crucially, to do the marketing and the audience education. It turned what was a risky project into a not risky project because I had 5 years to teach my audience to want to see this festival and to build press attention and press interest. The Lehrer NewsHour ended up doing 5 nights in a row, 5 minutes a night about this festival.
Wow.
We sold 92% of the seats to the Arab Festival. Wow. That's huge for us, for anything, but 92% for art that no one in my audience had ever heard of before. We can do these big, exciting, transformative projects. They can be risky projects, but we reduce the risk by giving ourselves this time to do them well. And I encourage every arts organization to sit back and think about, what are our dreams? What's our dream project? What do we really want to do? Which project could we never imagine doing it? And let's try and make it happen 4 years from now or 5 years from now. And let's really put the resources to finding money, to finding artists, and let's do something really wonderful. Just talking about it for these few years is going to energize your staff and your board. And it has an amazing positive impact on an arts organization when you start to think of these big projects. And it has one last corollary benefit. Maybe this never happens in Atlanta, but at other places I've seen, there can be tension between the artistic director and the executive director. And one of the things I've seen is that, you know, I always say the artistic director acts like the naughty child and the executive director like the angry parent. You know, the artistic director says, I want this, I want that, and the angry parent says, no, 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 we can't afford it, which is a completely counterproductive relationship. What I like to do with an artistic director is sit down and say, what do you want? What are the projects you're dreaming of? But rather than saying, I can give it all to you next year, I array it over a 5-year period. So the artistic director starts to believe I'm actually on their side, but I also can array things in a way that I think I can create the resources to do what they want. And so I really would love for arts organizations to start to think about their programming planning on a much longer time frame. It does not mean you write this in ink. It's all in pencil. You can change things whenever you want. You can have a new idea and throw it in. That's all great. But work on a few big, exciting projects and give yourself the time and the space to do it. I think you'll see it as a big impact on the way your organization functions.
Okay. Rule 7 says there must be...
6.
6. I did it again. I think I'm watching the clock, that's why.
I'm very obsessive about these rules.
Rule 6, marketing is more than brochures and advertisements.
Absolutely.
You talk prolifically in the book about the 2 kinds of marketing. Would you explain? Yeah,
this is, if there's one thing besides extending your planning calendar and doing exciting art that I would really like to talk about today, it's about the nature of marketing. I break marketing to 2 pieces, and I call them, they're my names, they're not important, but I call them programmatic marketing, which is the marketing we do to sell tickets or get people to come to our galleries or to come to our educational programming. This is our traditional arts marketing. And I think we have a ways to go to improve, because obviously people are getting their information in new ways and we need to be responsive to that. But I won't talk that much about that today. But programmatic marketing is where we spend most of our marketing money and most of our marketing time. But the second piece is what I call institutional marketing. And to me, institutional marketing is just at the heart of making a vibrant arts organization. And I'll give an example from my time running the Alvin Ailey Company. I got to Alvin Ailey in 1991. We were bankrupt virtually at the moment. And we thought we were very famous. We were a little confused by being in such trouble. We thought we were so famous. And then shortly after I got there, the author Alex Haley died. You know Alex Haley wrote the book Roots. And we got hundreds of letters of condolence because people thought Alex Haley was Alvin Ailey. And that told me that we were not quite as famous as we thought we were. And so we put in place a 1-year institutional marketing effort to try and get people to really appreciate who we were and what we were about. And I'd like to discuss it. I'll do it relatively quickly. When I give these examples, please don't hear me saying these are the exact things every arts organization should do. I can give you examples I did from the Kansas City Ballet, what we did for institutional marketing there in terms of our trips to New York and putting people on our board, et cetera, from the news media. What we did at Ailey, though, to me is a good example of the kinds of things one can do. In December of 1992, it starts, we got on the Phil Donahue show. For those of you who are very young, he was the person before Oprah. And 18 million people saw that show. Our dancers danced, our artistic director Judith Jamison spoke. If that's all we had done, it would have had no impact. Because the truth about marketing, it's about repetition. One thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. But we did a great Donahue show. The next month was President Clinton's first inauguration. And through a board member, I found out that there was going to be a gala the night before the inauguration with Michael Jackson and Barbra Streisand and Aretha Franklin and Fleetwood Mac and all these great people. And I wanted to get on that gala. So I asked my board member who was running it. He told me it's a man named Rahm Emanuel who was running the gala. So I called up Mr. Emanuel, who cursed at me, and then told me, that was a cheap joke. But we got ourselves, we wormed our way into the gala. And 88 million people saw that on CBS the night before President Clinton's inauguration, with my dancers dancing 3 minutes of their signature piece, Revelations. 2 months later, we did an exhibition about the history of the organization at the Smithsonian Institution. And in July, that was in March, in July we did a big free concert in Central Park. And 35,000 people came. I had a separate section set up for my donors to watch these 35,000 people loving the Ailey organization. But also CNN came and filmed a segment and ran it 24 times over the next 24 hours, which is great. The next month, Mayor Giuliani named our street Alvin Ailey Place. And then in November of that year, we published 2 books, or I should say 2 books were published about the company. One was Judith Jamison's autobiography, and one was a book of photographs by a man named Jack Mitchell, who took this picture, and who had been photographing the Ailey company since its beginning. And finally, in December of '93, 1 year after Donahue, was our 35th anniversary season, and we did a big gala with Denzel Washington and Jesse Norman and Al Jarreau and Dionne Warwick and all kinds of people. Everywhere you turned around for those 12 months, there was Ailey, doing something interesting and important and vital. People were paying attention to Ailey all of a sudden in a different kind of way than before. In 1992, we raised $1.7 million. In 1993, as all this was going on, we raised $3.4 million. We doubled our fundraising from 1 year to the next and paid off the entire $1.5 million historic deficit in the 1 year. We did it because people wanted to be associated with us. People were excited by us all of a sudden. And we also did it because all of a sudden my board was energized. You know, when I got to Ailey and I went to my 36 board members one by one and I said, who do you know who can help us? There was an astonishing fact. Not one of my board members had ever met another human being. And now, 2 years later, we're doing all this great marketing and they're so proud of us. And they had made thousands of friends that year. It was just amazing. They got let out of their bubbles. And all of a sudden, they were helping with fundraising because they were proud. And I learned a really important fact, that my job as executive director is to make my board not embarrassed. And you know, a lot of board members may be passionate about our work, but they have a little embarrassment at the back of the head. It might be because of our financial situation, which was certainly true for Ailey. It might be because they think their friends won't like the art, or because the thank you letters have typos or whatever it is. And my job is to make them so proud and not embarrassed that they want their friends to be associated with us. And to me, this is what I mean by institutional marketing. And lest you think that only a big fancy company like Ailey can do it, it's just not true. Any arts organization can find ways to make their community think they're vital. Involve celebrity, bring someone important, an important sports person to an educational event. Make sure you're talking about all the elements of what you do as an organization. If you do arts education, we tend not to market it because there's no earned income, but market it, let people know what you do. Get people excited about the work you do, get people excited about you as an institution. The organizations that do that well are the organizations that are going to continually bring new people into their families. And it's a combination of the really exciting artistic planning and the really great institutional marketing that brings resources to an arts organization, even in a recession. And so, to me, organizations that don't plan on this, that don't have an institutional marketing plan, are losing out. And for the board members who are here, one of the ways a board member can really help to oversee their organization is to ask what the institutional marketing plan is. and to demand that there be an institutional marketing program. And my belief is that every small or mid-sized organization should do something every 3 or 4 months that's really exciting. It can be an exciting artistic project, it can be an exciting special event, it can be an exciting announcement, but it's gotta come like clockwork. In every larger organization, it should be about once a month. And I have a meeting every single morning at 7 o'clock in the morning with my head of marketing. I had it this morning via phone, to talk about what the months ahead look like and what's coming up and what's coming up and what's coming up. And by the way, when you do this really well, it reduces your programmatic marketing costs. You spend less on selling your tickets because you've excited your community and they want to be part of you. So I can't stress this enough as an important element of a successful organization.
Wow. There must be only one spokesman, and the message must be positive.
Yes. I am so tired of reading about arts organizations airing their dirty linen in public. If you honestly think that going into the press saying things are terrible, we're in real trouble, and we don't have the money, and we may have to scale back, and blah, 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 if you really think that's going to bring you resources, it just doesn't. It just doesn't. Resources come to those organizations where the donors feel they're exciting, vital, well-run, and have a future. You don't get money by whining. And we've got to be more positive out there, or we're going to lose our funders. And I'm so concerned about this because particularly in this economic environment, I see so many arts organizations being too public about their problems. And what happens when we do that is all we talk about is a problem, and we don't talk about the good stuff. Every arts organization in this room is doing really interesting work, good education, good performances, good exhibitions. And we stop talking about that, and all we start talking about is fights in the boardroom, fights amongst the staff, problems of financials, et cetera. It doesn't work. And when I've done my turnarounds, when I'm hired to do a turnaround, that's the only rule I make for my organizations is I am the person to control the press, and because I'm going to make the message positive. When I got to the Royal Opera House, we had so many people whining to the press that they every day would camp out at the pubs across from the Royal Opera House after work. And all the staff would come there and they'd start telling them stories, and they would end up on the newspaper the next day. And my board members, one of my board members, the one responsible for fundraising, went to the press saying no one should give us any more money. And this was all the few weeks before I arrived. This was not when I was there, thank goodness. But I don't let that happen. And when I got there, the press had had 5 years of all this horrible news about the Royal Opera House, and I just stopped it from one day to the next. And all I talked about was we're building a new opera house, we're doing all this exciting new work, we have the largest arts education program in Europe, and I just talked about the things we did well. And the press was startled for a while because they wanted to know where all the juice was and all the good stuff was, and I made them write that because that's all I was going to give them. And all of a sudden, people in our community started to realize we weren't a bunch of incompetent people. We actually had great programming and that they should support that programming. There has to be one central press strategy. It has to be a positive strategy.
Fundraising must focus on the larger donor, but don't aim too high.
Right. This is particularly for arts organizations in a turnaround, so this is not applicable to every organization, what I'm about to say. But when you're really at death's door, you can't afford to focus on the $10 donor. I love $10 and $20 and $50 donors, believe me. I've spent a ton of time on that. But when you're about to go bankrupt, you can't focus on it. It's just not enough money. It's a longer term strategy because if you get that $10 or $20 or $30 donor and some of them become bigger donors. My biggest donor at the Kennedy Center used to be a $50 donor. Now she gives me $1 million a year. So I'm not against the small donor, but you don't have time when you're about to go under. But on the other hand, you can't be going and asking people for $1 million if no one else is giving you $10,000. And when I got to Alvin Ailey, my board kept saying, ask Bill Cosby for $1 million, ask Bill Cosby for $1 million. And if I had asked Bill Cosby for $1 million when half of my board was giving me $300 a year less, I would have looked like an idiot. And it's not the way to build a relationship. I believe in trying to find that amount that matters, but that the organization, board, and staff feel comfortable asking for. At Ailey, we set that amount at $1,000. That was right for Ailey at that point in time. I'm not making that as a prescription for anyone else, but we really focused on the $1,000 gift, and we brought in a ton of them by working really hard at it, because my board was really comfortable asking for that amount of money, and my staff was as well. But don't ask for the ridiculous sum or wait for that big billion-dollar gift to fall in your head and go bankrupt in the meantime. But you also can't only look at the very smallest donors. You've got to have some amount that makes a difference.
Would you also speak to the challenge grant idea?
Sure, absolutely. I love challenge grants, particularly if you're in trouble, and I love challenge grants, particularly in a bad economy. Challenge grant, of course, is when a donor gives you a gift, but it has to be matched, because it really does encourage other gifts. And you can create a challenge grant where one doesn't exist, and I'll give you an example. This was at ABT. Our deficit at ABT was about $5 million. And my board chairman was an extraordinarily generous man who used to give us $1 million a year. And I went to him, his name was Peter, and I said, Peter, would you give me a 5-year gift of $5 million? So your normal million a year for 5 years. But let me turn it into a challenge grant. And let me say you're only going to give it to us over these 5 years if I can match it with new gifts or increased gifts from existing donors. He said, great. And within 1 year, we had matched his $5 million because people wanted, this was an added incentive. By the way, particularly in a recession, when your dollar gets matched, it's an incentive to give. It gave us a reason to go back to a lot of people who'd already given to us. And we paid off the entire deficit of ABT with this fake challenge grant. Fake, only because I was going to get the money from him anyway. But it's a construct I find works.
Rule 9. The board must allow itself to be restructured. There's people out there saying, yeah, I agree with that. But how?
I really believe that just as arts organizations go through a life cycle, their boards must go through a life cycle. When I got to Ailey, about 80% of my board had been on the board for 35 years. They were the people, when the company was founded, who sewed the costumes, who drove the dancers to engagements, who did the bookkeeping. They were wonderful people. I loved them to death, and I didn't want to lose them from the Ailey family at all. But they weren't the right governors for the organization when we now had a $6.5 million budget, which we were about to go, and we were about to go bankrupt. Arts organization boards have to be introspective. They have to look at themselves and say, are we the right board right now? Must there be some change? What kind of change should there be, and how are we going to make that happen? And I think this is a requirement for healthy arts organizations. I don't think you can get around it. And unfortunately, what happens is organizations oftentimes only go through that restructuring when they're in such a deep crisis that they have no choice. But wouldn't it be lovely if we could do that before the crisis? And I really think that boards, particularly people will call it the nominating committee, I call it the governance committee, ideally, should not just be about having cocktails a few times a year with prospective new board members, but really should also be evaluating the board itself and saying, do we need to have a different kind of board structure at this time? It was the requirement for Ailey. Ailey would not exist today if we had not asked 18 of our board members to leave and replaced them with 18 new people who were right for the organization at their time. And if you're going to go through a major board change, particularly if your board needs culture change, and some of you probably have boards where a little culture change wouldn't be a bad thing, never add one new board member to a board that's not functioning well, because they get socialized to act like the bad board members in about 10 seconds. Rather, get 2, 3, 4 new board members, let them be together, meet each other, meet staff, come up with ideas, have all kinds of wonderful thoughts for the future, then bring that whole group to a board meeting. And your senior board members will say, who are these people and why are they so happy and optimistic? And you will start to make culture change that way.
Last question with a couple of modifications. Your rule is the organization must have the discipline to follow each of the preceding rules. And I'd like you to answer that in the context of, 1, can the same executive director turn around an arts company who led the organization into its currently desperate circumstances?
Okay.
And 2, do these rules apply when a national recession is the cause of these terrible circumstances?
First, let me just say about the rule itself. Sometimes people laugh at that rule. They think, oh, it's just, a throwaway rule. It's not. The problem I see is a lot of organizations will hear someone say, oh, do better marketing, and they'll try and do better marketing for a week or a month. Or they'll do their longer-term artistic programming for 3 weeks or 3 months and then stop. And what is required is a discipline to keep at this, to keep doing these things and to do them nonstop and to make it part of the way the organization functions. Can someone lead a turnaround when they were there when they got into problems? The answer is probably yes. It's a lot easier if you come in from the outside. It's a lot easier to come in from the outside because you're not associated with the problem and you're not identified with one of the factions that tends to form in an unhappy organization. So when you come in fresh with a new perspective, I think it's easier to do that. But by the way, also, you also then have to leave when the turnaround's done. Because you remember the bad times too well. I would be a terrible manager for the organizations I turned around because I'd be just too conservative. And it's a very sad thing when you actually have to walk away from an organization. It's sort of like when Mary Poppins leaves when the wind changes. That's how it feels like. And the second one was...
can the executive director do it when the real cause is the recession?
I believe you absolutely can do a turnaround in a bad economy. We turned around Ailey 91, 92. That was a terrible recession in this country. I don't believe recession means you can't have a healthy arts organization. I don't think it means you can't do a turnaround. It's harder. There's less resource. You have to compete better. But I think that arts organizations, there are arts organizations, many of them doing really, really well right now. It's hard, but they're doing well because they are sticking to their exciting art and they're sticking to their good marketing. So I absolutely believe that even though it's really painful right now, and believe me, I know I'm working harder than I've ever worked in this environment, I can still say that I believe that you can have a successful, vibrant arts organization in this economy.
And you've convinced me.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, that was wonderful.
You're going to get to ask your questions now, but I want to give some advice to every executive director of every arts organization in this room. You're going to go to your next board meeting and you're going to say, Susan Weiner has given you an assignment. Read the book.
Thank you.
The Art of the Turnaround.
Excellent.
With my picture on the cover.
Michael, is there anything you would like to add before we take questions from the floor?
happy.
Great. Okay. So while you work your way forward, I will start off with the first question. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you think turning around an organization is for a large institution and for a small institution?
They're both hard, and they're both hard in different ways. A large institution has typically access to more different kinds of pockets of money. And therefore, that makes it easier. There are typically, for a larger institution, more different avenues to approach, and also usually also more different program areas to focus on and to build constituency for. In that sense, a large organization has a big advantage. But a small organization has the advantage of focus. And you really can get a smaller group of people really working together. And a turnaround is 90% psychological, and it's about getting a group of people to focus on it together as a unit. And a smaller organization has a much easier chance of doing that, I find.
That's great. Okay, we'll start here on the right.
My name is Stephanie Scott, and I work in a program that I offer to nonprofits called the Passport to Giving, and I'm building my own foundation. Now, would you suggest, I'm going to be calling it the Families Foundation, based here in Georgia. Anyway, would you suggest a term of office for board members, and if so, how long would you consider that term to be?
I have to say, thank you for the question. It's a great question. I have a very different point of view about this than I think most people who write on the subject. So I'm going to give you my point of view, but know that most people think I'm stupid on the issue. I don't like term limits. I'll tell you why. People say term limits are good because they let you get rid of the bad board members. But also, I believe good board members are precious. And if I have a great board member, I don't want them serving 2 3-year terms and then having to go off for a year. If you think that smart, involved, generous, passionate person goes home and cries in their living room for that 1 year until they can come back to your board, they don't. They go and find something else to do. And I don't want them off my board forever. I love institutional memory on my board, and I love great board members. And also, if someone's not a good board member, I don't want them on my board for 3 more years. I would prefer to ask them to leave today. Now, I'm very hard-nosed about that, and people think I'm a little ridiculous, but I'm very happy to sit down with someone and say, it's been so wonderful having you on the board. We're very grateful for your service. This organization has moved in a way that we now need people with different skills, and would you consider making your place available to someone else who can serve us better at this time? I have said that more times than I can tell you, and 90% of the time, the answer I get is, thank you. Because board members who are not doing a good job know it, and they are just as embarrassed to ask to leave the board as you are as embarrassed to ask them to leave. So I feel nothing bad about asking someone to move off my board, because to me a board spot is precious. So I don't love term limits, but again, every book you read will tell you that I'm wrong.
Honesty is the best policy.
The question is, how do you deal with abusive behavior at different levels? Let me focus on the one between when board members are abusive. I don't put up with it very well. But I'll tell you what I really do is I try and get my problem board people. I spend an awful lot of time with them before board meetings and before important votes and before important discussions. And I really try and let them vent to me. I'm willing to have those scars because I don't want them making board meetings unpleasant for everybody else. If board meetings are unpleasant for everybody else, then the other board members will stop inviting their friends and associates to be on the board. And so if someone's really making a problem, they have to leave the board. And again, this is one of the reasons why I'm not upset to ask someone to leave a board if they're really causing trouble. But I tend to find that if I can spend a lot of time with that person and let them vent their frustrations and fears to me, it typically reduces the level of tension they create in public forums. But let me also say one other thing about a technique I use with board members that's not really for abusive board members, but it's to get board members involved. I really believe that one of the mistakes we sometimes make with our board is we think of the board as a whole, the board. And I don't do that. I think of my board as a collection of individuals. And one of my jobs is to get each of those individuals to embrace at least one of my projects. So that what I try and do is, I have my 5 years of projects. I'm trying to figure out which of those projects really excite a given board member. And then I let them adopt that project. They don't run it, but I let them meet the artists, I let them come to rehearsal, I let them see the teachers, if it's an educational program, I let them meet the children. I let them be involved. And when they get excited by a project, A, they get closer to the mission of the organization, and B, they start to bring their friends and associates to that project. And if I can start to get each board member adopting a different thing that I do or planning to do, I can now have a board that's very involved, very engaged, and feels very close to me. And I find some of the behavior you're describing that really comes out of fear starts to recede when individual board members are feeling very close to the work of the organization. So I really work extremely hard to get each board member to buy into a given project. And if I can do that, my board will feel so much more alive and involved. It's a much happier way of being.
That's great. Thank you. Over here, Lena.
Hi, I'm Lena Karstens. I'm the managing director with Dance Garage Theater Company.
Hey.
We've gone through a significant amount of change in the last few years, including retiring in a significant accumulated deficit.
Good.
I'd love for you to speak more about your comment that after a turnaround, the leader must leave.
Lena doesn't want to go.
If you don't have to go. if you really can turn your focus, I'm not saying you, but if one can turn a focus from how do I solve this big problem, how do I restructure, how do I get the place back on track, to let's really focus on these exciting new projects for the future, it's that transition that's required for the whole organization and certainly the staff leader. And for myself, I know that I was so scarred by the bad moments in the organizations I ran that I don't think for those organizations I could satisfactorily relax enough to say, yes, let's do this huge, big, exciting project 3 years from now that we could never afford 3 years ago. For me, the scars stay with me, but maybe it's because I'm so obsessive.
Can I follow up? Will you talk specifically about your decision to stay at the Kennedy Center as well?
To stay this long? The Kennedy Center was a very different situation. It wasn't really a financial turnaround, although when I arrived, it wasn't in great financial shape, but it was not that we were at death's door. Really more it was that we were programmatically pretty dull. And we didn't really have a sense of what we were trying to do programmatically. And what I've tried to do over these last 9 years has been to really build some leadership kinds of programs where we could really be expert and where we could really do good work. They focus on international programming very much. They focus on creating our own theater. They focus on our arts management training. They focus on our national arts education programming. And so those programs take longer to put together. And so I'm still in the midst of that. I have 2 more years.
Thank you. Okay, here on my right.
Hi, I'm Donna Peoples, and I'm an executive director of a nonprofit organization that is not arts related, but I was the executive director of the Pensacola Little Theater and Pensacola Cultural Center, which had almost a $3 million debt. And without reading the book, I now have the book, you are so right on. I mean, we did all of those steps and got out of debt, and the organization is flourishing, but I also felt like I had to step away. I felt it had to go to the next phase, and I didn't have it in me. So, but I did want you to comment on the Arts in Crisis program because I'm a mentor. And I've been a mentor since you started it. I lived in Washington, D.C. when you started the program and applied to be a mentor. And I've been working with a number of organizations, probably about 20 in the last couple of years, and really have enjoyed it.
Thank you. The Arts in Crisis program was something we started last February, a year ago February. We were reading in the newspaper about all these arts organizations that were having serious difficulties in the economy. And we saw a lot of organizations cutting programming. And we thought that it would be important to offer some free consulting to arts organizations that wanted help. So we created a website, and we allowed any arts organization, performing arts organization in the United States that wanted free consulting help to log on to artsincrisis.org and ask for help. And we also asked for those experienced arts managers who wanted to be mentors to these organizations to serve as mentors. And so we have a mentor here. And we've had so far about 540 arts organizations receive help, and about 120 people serve as mentors. And it's really been wonderful. No money changes hands. It's all grassroots, people helping people. And this tour that I'm on now comes out of that. I found that there were a lot of organizations that didn't really want a consultant or need a consultant, but still had questions. We did a few public sessions like this. They went well, and we decided let's do this across the country. And to the question that was asked over here, it relates to the Kennedy Center's role as the National Cultural Center. We felt we are chartered by Congress to be involved with the whole nation, so we decided to go all across the country. So these discussions come out of that work as well. And we're hopeful that pretty soon there won't be a need for any more Arts in Crisis.
It's great. It's an amazing program. We were thrilled when we saw it come out so quickly after the market crashed. Let's move over to the left.
Thank you, Mr. Kaiser, for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. My name is Ron Young. I'm a producer, commercial producer, and I have 2 short questions. The first one concerns about our country overall, since governments at no level can seem to stay within their budgets, and we are maybe on the edge of some real serious problems. How do you think this will affect the arts, contributions. And the second question is, have you ever heard of a institute in New York that trains producers called CTI, Commercial Theater Institute? Can you comment on those?
Sure. With respect to the macroeconomy, clearly to the extent that we have deficits, large deficits in our economy, there's going to be inflation. And inflation is problematic for us in the arts in two ways. Number one, we have a problem with inflation anyway, which I'll get to in a moment. And number two, it means portfolios are worth less. And when people's worth is less, it means they're going to give less. And the stock market will be down. So large deficits in our country over the long term have a very problematic impact on the arts. But let me talk about inflation for a moment, because it's one of the very important issues of arts. You know, we in the arts have these two economic factors which really affect us dramatically in the arts. The first is we have a very difficult time improving worker productivity. You know, you'll read in the newspaper about worker productivity in the auto industry going up 2% or in the banking industry going up 3%. And these numbers are crucial because when productivity is higher, it reduces the impact of inflation. And so it makes inflation less in those industries. The problem is we're in an industry with a very hard time with worker productivity. We don't play Beethoven's Fifth Symphony faster every year. There are the same number of people in Hamlet as when Shakespeare wrote it. And as a result, we don't have that help with inflation. So we suffer from inflation really, really problematically in our world. It's why when you do your annual budget, you'll see costs go up every year, and it's so scary. And a lot of times, if boards don't understand this, they'll think we're spendthrifts. But the truth is, we just don't get improvements in productivity very well. And then we have a second-order economic impact. And that is once we build a theater, we literally set in concrete the real earned income potential. When I ran Alvin I brought the company to the Herodaticus, which is a beautiful Roman amphitheater built at the base of the Acropolis in Athens, Greece. It's a beautiful place to see a performance. You sit on these stone bleachers and the performers are outside and the Parthenon's lit up behind you in the moon. It's just gorgeous. My dancers were thrilled to dance on this ancient stage, and I just stood on the stage saying, no earned income increase in 2,000 years. Same number of bleacher seats. And it's true. And so we have these two problems in the arts. We have really rapidly increasing prices, and our real earned income is set. And so the difference gets bigger and bigger and bigger every year, and that's the challenge we all face in the arts. It's why this year is harder than last year, and next year will be harder still. Is this gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And how we fill that gap is crucial. And I'm afraid that the technique we've used to fill this gap for the most of the last 30 years has been to raise ticket prices. And as a result, we have disenfranchised huge amounts of people. And a lot of people go around saying the arts are irrelevant. The arts aren't irrelevant, they're just too expensive. 2 days ago, the Metropolitan Opera announced their prices for next year. 2 of the best seats for an average opera, not a gala, 2 tickets, $750. For $750, you can buy a computer and watch Maria Callas and Joan Sutherland and Leontine Price on YouTube for free forever. We have it's a problem. We have created a pricing structure that makes us seem less relevant to our communities, and we have to rethink that. And we have to think how we're going to fill this gap. So thank you for that question. I'm sorry for the very long answer. The second answer is, I know about CTI. I don't know enough to talk about it specifically. I'm a real not-for-profit guy, I'm afraid, and that's a real for-profit thing. And I'm just a not-for-profit person. That's all I know. Never made a profit.
Terrific. Okay, I believe that you're next.
Yes. Hi, my name's Angela Harris, and in 2007, I started a dance organization here in Atlanta called Dance Canvas. And our mission is to provide opportunities for career development for emerging choreographers and youth, and audience development for professional dance. So one of the most valuable gifts I got in my first year of Dance Canvas was your book. And in reading it, I saw a lot of correlation between the turnaround and actually starting an arts organization.
Absolutely.
And so I guess my question would be, how if you could give me 3 tips for, for a new arts organization, small, and how to do those things with limited staff and resources. That would be amazing.
The first is going to sound a little airy-fairy, but it's really important. You've got to be clear in what your mission is. Most arts organizations have these fluffy statements: we want to bring the beauty of dance to the world. It's not helpful enough. It doesn't direct activity enough, particularly for a small startup. You've got to be really clear in what you're going to do. That's number 1. Number 2 is have a plan. How you're going to move from today to tomorrow to the next day, but have a plan for the next 2 or 3 years that you can use to communicate with the people you're trying to bring into your family, particularly new board members, because you need to build a board, donors, the press, your community. So have a plan. And number 3 is make sure you build on everything you do builds to the next. One of the big problems of young organizations is you work so hard to get that first performance, and you're running around like crazy to get the performance done, and it's the day after and you collapse, right? But you didn't capture all the people who came, you didn't capture everyone who expressed interest, and so the next time you got to start all over again. And so I really think for younger organizations, making sure you capture every expression of interest, every person, make sure they tell them at the first performance when your next performance is going to be, even if it's just 6 months from now, but get them involved, get their names, do a raffle at every performance and get their email addresses. And make sure you're building, each session builds on the last and gets more and more and more. If you do that, it's really hard work, but you'll find over 3 or 4 years, you now have a much more sizable portfolio.
Wonderful. How's that center mic doing?
I think we're okay.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Stacy Lucas with Georgia Shakespeare. My question is, on a national and a local level, the trend seems to be that many arts organizations are eliminating their executive or managing director or combining that position with their artistic director. On a lower level, many organizations, due to the recession, are combining both marketing and development into one mass department as well. Can you speak to that?
Sure.
And your comments on that?
I will speak to it. I don't, everything I'm saying here obviously is a generalization, so please don't take what I say as prescriptive. But I really believe we live in a very sophisticated world, and I believe there are different things to know between being an artistic director and executive director, and certainly different things to know between being a marketing director and a fundraising manager or director. And I believe that it's often dangerous when organizations start combining expertises, particularly the marketing and the fundraising, because I've found in a lot of organizations, when you combine the marketing and the fundraising, all the time spent on fundraising and the marketing gets short shrift. And my belief is, I think you can tell, is what creates good fundraising is good art and good marketing. I always say it drives my fundraisers crazy, but I always call them the bureaucrats who collect the check. But the real fundraisers are the programmers, the artists, and the marketers. And I feel like if you start to merge all these things together and not each area is getting its full weight, it does scare me. Now, some organizations are so small you can't afford to do everything or have people doing everything. But I really want organizations to make sure they're not skimping on their marketing activity.
That's great. Sarah, here on the left.
Michael, thank you very much for coming. I'm Charles Edwards, a longtime enthusiastic board member of the Alliance Theater, and also a new CEO for an organization focused on helping the homeless to achieve self-sufficiency. I see a lot of principles that are crossover. My question is, in today's economy, what are your thoughts about more collaboration, even mergers of some of these smaller organizations in order to improve their chances of becoming healthy and spawning new work?
Thank you. It's a great question. I'm sorry we didn't get to it before because it's so important. I'm a huge believer in joint ventures, particularly if right now you don't have the resources to do the most exciting project. Find someone else to do it with. Remember I mentioned that when I got to ABT, I announced this big project based on Shakespeare's Othello? I couldn't afford to do alone. I got the San Francisco Ballet to do it with me. It cut my costs in half. Or sometimes working with another organization, you can make a really exciting project. For instance, there's a great dance company in Chicago called Hubbard Street, and they have a joint venture with the Chicago Symphony. Chicago Symphony is looking, like many symphonies, for ways to diversify its programming, and so now once a year, its programming is all about dance for 1 week a year, and Hubbard Street dances, and it's a very popular week for both organizations now. It's a great joint venture. I do believe in joint artistic projects, joint educational projects, and I believe in joint projects that can make something very big. One of my favorite projects we did at the Kennedy Center was about 4 years ago. We did a Shakespeare festival involving 60 local arts organizations. We did the plays of Shakespeare, the ballets based on Shakespeare, the operas based on Shakespeare, the jazz based on Shakespeare, you name it, there was Shakespeare. And we all worked together, and it brought the whole arts community together. The paper paid much more attention to us. For the first time ever, our tourism board wasn't talking about George Washington, they were talking about the arts. And it really changed the way the arts were perceived by us all working together in a great project. I'm skeptical about the ability of lots of organizations to physically merge, to legally merge. First of all, I love diversity of artistic perspective. So I'm not thrilled if all these organizations are merging together. I'd love to see all these different people with different ideas doing their work. But also, one of the things that scares me is I read a lot now about this is a time to thin out the arts world. And I worry about the organizations we're going to thin out are the organizations that are the financially weak ones. And the financially weak ones are not necessarily the artistically uninteresting ones. And I do an awful lot of work with diverse organizations, arts organizations of color, with avant-garde organizations, with rural organizations. These organizations are doing really interesting work. They need to figure out how to support themselves. I would hate to see them gotten rid of simply to say it's good to have a smaller arts field. I don't believe in that myself. I think there's enough resource out there for all of us. I think we haven't learned how to market ourselves well enough to get to the resources. I think when we do that, we're going to find the arts are much better supported. And I don't think it's a question of too many arts organizations. I think it's about not enough marketing leading to not enough donors.
It's terrific. Okay, here we are.
Thank you for being here. I have a quick anecdote in response to the Metropolitan comment and then a quick question.
Can you please introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, I'm Claire Hennessy. I work with Cox Curry & Associates here in Atlanta, a fundraising consulting firm. My anecdote is the opposite of the Metropolitan. A medium-sized museum in Norfolk, the Chrysler Museum, recently announced free admission to everyone all day, every day. And they have actually seen a significant increase in their voluntary door donations. Absolutely. And seen a much larger, diverse group of people coming into the museum than in the past 10 years. So that's a pretty exciting possibility for other organizations as well. My question relates to your rule number 7. Do you have advice for how you handle the factions of disgruntled staff and board members in a turnaround, especially when they've been asked to leave the organization and you lose that control over the public message?
I have faced that. Certainly I faced that in England. The only thing I can do about that is to do really exciting stuff and talk about really exciting stuff. And you know what? The noise goes away after a while. And it is when you don't have something fun to talk about that bad noise really takes over. So I'm constantly working on what's the next exciting thing to announce and the next exciting thing to announce. And I celebrate my victories. If you are in challenge, one of the problems of challenged organizations is, let's say you owe $400,000, is sometimes we feel like the only moment to celebrate is when that $400,000 is gone. But it's not true. We can celebrate every $10,000, every $50,000. And you know what? It's like that old, remember the old community chest thermometers that they filled in as you got close to the campaign? Why that was such a good psychological technique was because people get on board a turnaround or any campaign if they think it's going to work. And the more we can whittle away at the problem, the more comfortable people are going to be that we're really going to solve the problem. And I think sometimes if we have a challenge, we look only at that total amount as being this victory, and the victory comes along the way. So I'm constantly celebrating. And as you celebrate, and as people say, wow, we got rid of this amount, and now we got rid of this amount, and now this good thing is happening, now this good thing is happening, more and more people start to believe. And your naysayers, they lose their potency. They just lose their potency.
That's great. In the center now.
Hi, I'm Amy Ratchford. I'm with Synchronicity Theater. And I actually read your article about the pricing, I think a few weeks ago, and this question came up then. We are a small theater. Our top ticket price is $23.
That's great.
Right. And yet, we, along with a lot of other theater organizations in the city, are finding it hard to fill our theaters. So I don't think it's a pricing issue, but it is still a relevancy issue. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts from your own experience or from folks you've talked to across the nation about how people are talking to their communities in a different way.
I really think it gets back to the institutional marketing. I would like to know, when a theater company has $23 seats and isn't filling its theater, I would like to know what they are doing to get the community excited about the organization. And what happened this month and last month and the month before and the month before and the month before. I would like to know that. Because I believe that too often we rely just upon people getting excited about the work and not necessarily getting excited about the organization. And I would like to know what you've done, because that's really where I think the communication has to happen. I think we try and sell our performances too much, performance by performance, and not enough getting the community to say, I love this group. They do so many interesting things. I would like to know the joint ventures you've done. I'd like to know the fancy things you've appeared at. I'd like to know where you've gotten your press. And I'd like to know how you create the sense of excitement and vibrancy in your community.
Do you have time for lunch?
Email me. I'd like to know. I'm serious. Yeah. Email me. I'd like to know. Okay, because I don't believe that you have a pricing problem. No. But I do believe, I'm going to guess that you have a visibility problem in your community. And I don't know your organization at all, so I'm not saying that from any knowledge, but that is my guess. And I'd like to know the steps you are taking to make your organization really sing in the community.
Great answer. So we are here, and in the center, and I think those will be our last three questions. Yes, Charlie, go ahead.
Excuse me. Thank you for being here. I'm Charlie Yates, president of the Atlanta Opera.
Great.
I was going to ask the question about collaboration. Let me have a quick follow-on of the question. You talked about programmatic collaboration. What about back office collaboration? Do you see opportunities? Are there best practices in that? And then secondly, sort of the bigger picture of going to funders. We have them saying, we don't like your business model. You only bring in 30 cents on the dollar, and you've got to raise 70 cents. These are the same people that will give 100 cents on the dollar to a social service or health care or some other institution, but they don't see it in the arts. How do you overcome that objection?
Sure. The first question was about back office joint ventures. I do believe in back office joint ventures. We're part of several of them at the Kennedy Center. I don't believe in back office joint ventures that share marketing and fundraising. That's a precious asset. You know, for me, fundraising is about building a relationship, and I don't want to lose that relationship. That's mine. In terms of, I'm sorry, the second part was...
Second part was,
about how to overcome,
about,
yes.
Just our business model and funder objection to, you know...
First of all, I believe the main thing we have to remember is 65% of arts funding in this country comes from individuals, and I think individuals have less of a problem than corporations do with the model you're talking about, and I believe that percentage is going to go up over time. I'm a huge believer in individual donors, because I think there's so many of them, and the money's unlimited. But also, I'd say, is I also present myself as a social service agency, and I think sometimes we forget that there are many things we're doing. I'm sure you do great education at the Atlanta Opera, and I would love to know the institutional marketing you're doing about the education, because I believe that we have a real opportunity to raise substantial sums for what we're doing in our society in several ways. Number one, for example, let's just take dance as a field. You know, if you take a preteen and teach them to dance and teach them to respect their body, you are going to help to limit some of the things that are very costly for our society, like teen pregnancy, drug abuse, HIV, AIDS. We have a real opportunity, those of us who work in dance, to make a very important claim about the way we affect positively our society, financially as well as in terms of the public health of our society. Arts education, which we didn't unfortunately get a chance to talk to much about today, but crucial topic. You know, the pendulum is swinging back. We now have a country where less than 17% of our GDP comes from manufacturing. We are no longer a manufacturing country. We are a creative economy. Every corporate leader will tell you they want a different kind of education of the workforce. They need trained, thoughtful, problem-solving, creative people. Well, who's going to help develop those? We in this room. We have a real opportunity to sell ourselves differently than we're doing. But I believe because our marketing has been so focused on earned income, on ticket sales, that we've only been pushing the performances, the performances, the performances. And I also believe that we tend to approach fundraising too much from a moralistic standpoint. You should support us. The arts are important in our community. You must give us money. We deserve to be supported. And I don't find that to be a very compelling argument for fundraising.
And on the left.
Excuse me, my name is Lucius Sizemore, and I'm a board member for the DeKalb Symphony Orchestra here in the outskirts of Atlanta. My question, you've already referred to the importance of people dying in a proper schedule to support their arts organization.
Great.
And,
Love it.
My question is a little step farther, and that is, would you comment on the appropriate role of an endowment for an arts or for any arts organization or nonprofit, and also what the pros and cons of having established an endowment does for you?
I love an endowment. If someone walks in and gives me an endowment, I am thrilled and I'm thankful and I'm grateful. But too many people think that the endowment is the answer to a healthy arts organization. And that is dangerous for a couple of reasons. Number one, every not-for-profit organization grows to the point that it is uncomfortable. If you have an endowment, you're just going to build your budget even bigger. When the Getty Museum was formed, some of you are old enough to remember that, with $1 billion endowment, and we all said, oh my God, what are they going to do with that? They could never spend all that money. This year they're laying off staff. It's not a safety net. It doesn't prevent organizations from getting into trouble. And too many organizations think they're going to create an endowment when they're not ready for it. A successful arts organization does really exciting programming, markets themselves really aggressively. That combination brings lots of people into the organization of different kinds. Those people create revenue that goes into great programming that you market really aggressively, and you bring in more people, and you get more money, and you do even better programming, and you market it even more, and this cycle hums. And when you're in one of those organizations, you feel it, and it's glorious. That has to be protected at all costs. You don't want to now say, oops, let's not do such great programming for a few years, let's build an endowment. And that's what happens in a lot of organizations. Only organizations that has that cycle humming should contemplate diverting attention away to create an endowment, or frankly, to build a building. You've got to get that cycle going. So I love endowment funds. I'd love to have a bigger one. And if someone gives it to me, I'll be so grateful. But for a lot of organizations, it's not the right moment to be creating an endowment fund.
Great. And our last question.
Yes, my name is Love McNeil. I'm interning at the Porter Sanford Performing Arts Center, which is available for rental at 3181 Rainbow Drive, Decatur, Georgia, 30034.
That's a good intern.
Institutional marketing.
I'm actually curious. It seems that people of my generation are not as interested in the arts because we are addicted to YouTube and all of the internet web things that are going on. How do we get the people of my generation more focused to the sitting in the seats instead of watching it on the screen?
I think we really have to attend to what the repertory is. You know, a lot of arts organizations, it's a great question, a lot of arts organizations pay lip service to wanting to diversify their audience, younger people, different ethnicities, whatever it is. And then they try and trick people into coming.
Right.
You know, when I got to the Kennedy Center, one of our entities is the National Symphony Orchestra, and they decided they wanted younger people. They wanted you to come.
Right.
So they created a subscription brochure where all the words were on angles and the pictures were fractured and all this kind of stuff, thinking that was going to attract you. All that happened was not one young person subscribed, and the old people couldn't read it.
Right.
If I am serious about wanting you in my theater,
Right.
I have to really think through the work I do, work that matters to me. I'm not going to just do junk, but work that matters to me, but that's also going to matter to you. For example, at the Kennedy Center, one of the things we've done is we've done social dancing. Summer nights, you can come, several nights in the summer, we hire a big dance band, and we give dance lessons for an hour, and then one night's swing, and one night's ballroom, and we'll have 5,000 20-year-olds coming over to the Kennedy Center and starting to feel part of our organization. And we have to find a series, which we've been working on, a series of activities, but it also involves doing, not just seeing, where people feel really involved. But it has to be a concerted part of my mission, and it has to be something I am dedicated to doing, not just something saying, let me see if I can trick a few different kinds of people to come into my theater.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank the Foundation Center team. I want to thank all of the colleagues that worked on this project. This was a volunteer coordinated effort. Michael Kaiser, your clarity inspires us. Your ideas are so valuable.
Thank you.
You humble us by how hard you work, by coming all across the country and by coming here. Thank you very much. And Susan, thank you very much.